Welcome to Frasier on Film, the Frasier TV show podcast with a twist. Each episode of the podcast visits each episode of Frasier across its 11-series run. But our main focus isn't on the good doctor himself, no. It's going to be one of the guest appearances on the show that week. That could be one of the many A-listers who called into Frasier's KACL radio show, or just someone who made a fleeting appearance at Cafe Nervosa. We'll delve into that actor's backstory, look over their cinematic offerings, and deep dive into one movie specifically. By the end, we'll see if we can make a connection between their character in Frasier and their character in the film we've just talked about. So you'll be hearing about icons and wash-ups, legends and starlets, sherry drinkers and beer guzzlers, blockbusters and B-movies. It's going to be an education in it all. But what if you don't really watch Frasier? That's fine, you'll probably know the actors we're talking about. And if you don't really know the actors we're talking about, then that's fine too. You'll know the movies. So whether you're a fan of Frasier or you're a fan of film, this is the podcast for you. So, pull up your favourite bar stool at McGinty's and tell the wine club you'll be running late. Because this is Frasier on Film, and I'm your host, Ben Murray. And you're listening. What if Frasier was partnered up with Mr. Miyagi and Jay Leno to fight crime and bring down the bad guys? I don't see it happening. So here we are again. Hello folks, and welcome to Season 1, Episode 10, double digits, of Frasier on Film and of Frasier itself. Today's episode, Oops, sees us tackle a slightly unorthodox one for the podcast because we're going to be focusing on television talk show host Jay Leno and discussing one of the only starring roles he ever had in a film, Collision Course, opposite Mr. Miyagi himself, Pat Morita. Now I have to tell you, this is a silly anecdote, but so rare is it for Leno to star in a movie that finding said movie has proven incredibly difficult. I had to take to eBay to order a copy, shipped all the way from the USA to the UK, only to discover that the damn thing isn't compatible with my region-locked Blu-ray player. So I now own Collision Course on DVD, one of the most expensive films I've bought in recent memory, and I can't play it. So if any of my listeners, probably US-based ones, but anyone's with a region-free player, want a copy of Collision Course, let me know. It's all yours. I had to use other means, shall we say, to watch Collision Course, but we'll get to that later because as of this recording, I have not yet watched it. And I've been excited for this one because it feels so strange. It's like David Letterman making a movie, isn't it? No idea what to expect, but all that's to come later. For now, dear listeners, let's take a load off, rest our weary bones, and pick over the carcass of this week's episode of Frasier.
Hey, where's my tickets to the Sonics game? They were here just a second ago. Somebody stole my tickets to the Sonics game! This stinks! This is total BS! This is... Oh, got it.
Hey, you guys don't think it's Bulldog who's getting canned?
Could be. Oh, no. He's the station's highest rated personality. I mean, with the exception of women 35 to 54 who happen to think that I'm sort of a god.
Episode title, Oops. Air date, 18th of November 1993. Writers Denise Moss and Cy Duquesne, and director Jimmy Burrows. This is a Bulldog-heavy episode, a Bulldog-focused episode. In fact, we meet a lot of the KACL gang in this episode. Starts off in Cafe Nervosa. Frasier and Niles are talking, and we meet Teddy, one of the sound engineers at the station. We meet Chopper Dave, who has to shout everything he says because he's so used to having to talk over the chopper blades, and Roz. And we get what we get before we go into discussions with the KACL gang is a recurring thing that happens with Niles' character, which seemingly drops out as the series goes on. It's these funny one-liners about the patients he's going to see later that day. He always makes some side joke about the patients he's about to see as he walks out of a door. Case in point here, he says, I'm conducting a seminar on multiple personality disorders and it takes me ages to fill out the name tags. And he leaves. There's a series of these things which are funny and always play into just Niles' character traits, but he drops out doing that as the series goes on, I think. Anyway, all the KACL gang are there. And Roz has some gossip that someone is about to be fired from the station. Frasier's like, I don't indulge in that. You shouldn't spread gossip. And then Bulldog walks in, and everyone is like, what if it's Bulldog? Dan Butler as Bulldog is another one of these iconic characters. We had BB last week. Bulldog is absolutely iconic. We get a couple of cliched things from him here. Well, not cliched things, just things we come to know about his character. One is he loses things, gets really angry, and then suddenly finds them. Back at KACL, we get Jay Leno's call, which we'll come to shortly, and then we meet another of the KACL gang, Father Mike. He is in the corridor outside the recording booth, and he's worried that he's the one for the chop because his viewing figures, his audience numbers are down. But Frasier reassures him by sharing the news it is Bulldog who is for the chop. And of course, Bulldog overhears it, and we get some great physical comedy from Bulldog, something that he does a lot. He's not afraid to whack his head off things, to really be physical in his performance. And here he slams his head down on the desk several times. He decides to get ahead of things and quits before he's fired. As he's storming off, he suddenly turns back, grabs Roz, plants a smacker on her lips, says, "Don't wait for me." And off he goes. We then also get this really weird editing choice, something that barely ever reoccurs in Frasier, which is a point of view shot of Bulldog speaking directly to the camera, well, barking at the camera with a fish-eyed lens. And we hear these barking noises. Peculiar edit, but there you go. Anyway, Frasier was wrong, and Bulldog loses his job. And back at Frasier's apartment, Niles is there. He's dropped by with a lifeless plant, hoping that Daphne can encourage it back to life, but she's not there, and so he has to awkwardly make small talk with his dad. But Daphne's soon home, and she picks up on things from Frasier. She actually shows her psychic abilities have some standing in reality because she realizes that he holds himself responsible for Bulldog losing his job. His dad ain't happy. His dad loves to listen to Bulldog, and sure enough, Bulldog turns up because he's got nowhere to live. He's just lost his job. I have to say, this is a bit ridiculous. Bulldog turns up looking like he's been sleeping rough for weeks, turns up at Frasier's apartment for some reason, looking for hospitality. I'm sure he has many friends, but he turns up at Frasier's. He's looking really rough around the edges. He asks for a shower because he's like all cold and everything. It's like, I'm sure you only lost your job earlier that day. This is a bit much. But anyway, Daphne and Martin and Eddie put pressure on Frasier to get back down to the station and clear things up.
I'll go down to the station. I will talk to the monster on the 6th floor and futilely attempt to get a man back his job that I don't even care for. And in the process, I will probably end up spitting out my teeth like chiclets. Is there anything else I can do for you?
Oh, if you go in by the market, we're low on dog food.
So we meet the boss of the station. He's this really fiery character, great casting, very confrontational, very big character. He seems dangerous, and Frasier's there grovelling and begging for Bulldog to get him his job back, only to find out that it was actually him who was in line for the chop. And now that he's so admirably got Bulldog's job back, the station needs to make cuts, and Frasier's got to go, but not before the higher-ups call the boss and fire him. And there's our episode. A fun little one. It's a good one. It's an enjoyable one. I like that a bit more attention is given to Bulldog. I like that we see a bit more of the KACL family. And we see that Frasier ultimately has to do the right thing after making a mistake. So we're carrying on this trend of ethics and morality, which I so enjoy. A few bits of trivia here. First appearance of Chopper Dave on the show, and he'll only appear on camera once more, but his poster will be in the show in the hallway at KACL for many years to come. It's also the first appearance of Father Mike, whose show we learn is called Religion on the Line. Father Mike mentions his low ratings, and actually that's going to come into play in a couple years' time when a certain Kate Costas takes over at the station. And like I said, much is made over the course of the series about whether Daphne really is psychic, and there are lots of laughs to be had at her expense over it. But this episode is one of the few times where she really seems to exert some sort of power of perception. We'll also see that happen again in a few episodes' time in relation to Martin's unsolved murder case. But anyway, enough of Frasier and Bulldog. They've had their time to shine. Let's see just what the hell Jay Leno was thinking, calling into Frasier's show. Here he is.
Dr. Crane, we have Don on his car phone. He's having a problem with his weight.
Don, it's a common problem. I'm listening.
It's the screwiest thing, Doc. I eat healthy, I work out, but no matter what I do, I can't lose a pound. It's very depressing.
Yes, well, losing weight can be a lifelong struggle. It takes a commitment. Now, if you're ready to accept that, there are a number of things I can suggest.
May I take your order, please?
Don, what was that?
Huh? Oh, nothing. It was the radio. Oh, go ahead. You were talking.
Don, where are you?
I'm just driving around.
Please, speak into the clown's mouth.
Don?
Sorry, Dr. Green. Oh, I'm gonna lose you. I'm going into a tunnel. Goodbye.
Yes, and the light at the end of that tunnel is a heat lamp over a large order of fries.
All right, folks. Now listen, I want to preface this snapshot of Jay Leno's career by saying that given that he's not really best known for making movies, I'm actually going to spend a fair bit of time discussing the 2010 Tonight Show conflict, which, if you're unaware of, as I was, you are not going to want to miss. So stick around. Be prepared. I've warned you. Jay Leno, born April 28th, 1950 in New York. Seems all of the guests so far have been born in New York. His mother was born in Scotland and moved to America at the age of 11. And his father was born to Italian immigrants from the Campania region. His family then later moved to Andover in Massachusetts.
Now, this is the kind of town where when people move far away, they go to North Andover, you know. So it's kind of fun, you know, the same restaurants, the same gas stations.
But this is like one of the most famous prep schools in the country. Is
Phillips Academy, yeah. I was a townie. Don't often get beat up by the preppies, yeah. So that was another rite of passage. You're uptown, hey, Phillips Academy, oh, you know, and then you get punched in the face by George Bush or somebody famous, you know.
Now, this is your house?
Yeah, it is my house. Actually, I bought this house from my brother, and then he passed away, and then I just wanted to keep it.
But there are other people living in there.
Well, my friend Louis from high school lives here. He takes care of the house for me, and it works out great.
Were you close with your brother?
Yeah, my brother was 10 years older than I, and we couldn't have been more different. He was really smart and went to Yale, and I was kind of stupid and became a comedian.
And at odds with what would later become his legacy as an entertainer and talk show host, Leno's bachelor's degree was in speech therapy. And in order to pay for his studies, he took up work as an MC at various talent shows and started performing in comedy clubs in 1973. I can't really imagine there was much money in that, but there you go. It got him through college. Or university, whatever that is, wherever you get a bachelor's degree in America. I don't know. I'm a limey. Do Americans still say limey? I don't know. Anyway, Leno became known for his prominent jaw, which has been described as mandibular prognathism. I'm not sure if I pronounced that correctly. And he was told surgery could fix it, but he didn't want to endure the long healing period associated with it. So he decided not to take any action at all. And it's now really part of his distinct look. Later on in the 70s, his comedy career had started to take off. He had made his first appearance on The Tonight Show in 1977, and he began starring in bit parts in TV and film. Though, as mentioned previously, his only starring role was in the 1989 direct-to-video Collision Course, but he also started numerous times doing stand-up on Late Night with David Letterman. But Jay Leno's relationship with The Tonight Show really started in 1986 when he made a guest host appearance, actually many guest host appearances, substituting in for Johnny Carson where he could. Johnny Carson, for you UK listeners and all those non-American listeners, was the host of The Tonight Show for the longest time. It's where Jack Nicholson got his "Here's Johnny" from. In 1992, Leno replaced Carson full-time as the new host of The Tonight Show, a decision which shocked many, as everyone pretty much expected David Letterman to be Carson's natural successor. This is because Late Night with David Letterman, which was one show, and The Tonight Show, hosted by Johnny Carson, was another show, and they would regularly battle in the ratings. And they would continue to do so even when Leno took over. But in July 1995, The Tonight Show, helmed by Leno, would finally beat Letterman. Why? Because Leno interviewed Hugh Grant, who had recently been arrested, as many of you will know, and some of you will remember, for receiving oral sex in public from a prostitute. In a public place. It was in his car parked in a public place, but I digress. But while this competition was ongoing, a new upstart was on the late night talk show scene. A man by the name of Conan O'Brien, and he was hosting a show for NBC called Late Night. And though Leno would go on to host The Tonight Show until 2014, the story is much more intriguing than a simple, healthy 28-year tenure as talk show host. For those familiar with what went on, you're going to have to indulge me here as I explain to those listeners, particularly the non-US listeners, just what happened.
And I said, you know, there's really only one person who could have done this into his 60s, and that was Johnny Carson. I think it's fair to say I'm no Johnny Carson. So I called up my buddy, I called up my buddy Jerry Seinfeld. I said, Jerry, what do you think, you know? And Jerry quit his show when it was the most popular. And I'm proud to say this show has been #1. We will keep it #1. And then in 2009, I'll say, Conan, take it over, it's yours. Because, you know, you can do these things until they carry out on a stretcher, or you can get out when you're still doing good and think, I'm not quitting show business. But I realize I'm not spending enough time with my cars. But anyway, this is not tomorrow. It's 5 years from today, and I want to say I don't think there's a better choice. Because, you know, when I took this show over, boy, there was a lot of animosity between me and Dave and who's going to get it. And quite frankly, a lot of what I thought, well, good friendships were permanently damaged. And I don't want to see anybody ever have to go through that again. Because this show is like a dynasty. You hold it, and then you hand it off to the next person. And I don't want to see all the fighting and all, and who's better, and nasty things back and forth in the press. So right now, here it is. Conan, it's yours. See you in 5 years, buddy. Okay. Clear enough? Enough said? All right. Let's get on with the show.
The 2010 Tonight Show conflict. So let me contextualize this for you. The 2010 Tonight Show conflict was a media and public relations conflict essentially involving NBC and the two late-night talk show hosts Conan O'Brien and Jay Leno over the time slot and hosting duties associated with The Tonight Show, which was this long-running franchise of a show. As I mentioned, Leno, host of The Tonight Show since 1992, and O'Brien, host of Late Night since 93, were very strong rating leaders for NBC for most of the decade. So in 2001, when O'Brien's contract neared its end and other networks came sniffing around, NBC said that they would extend his contract, and part of the discussion was that he would eventually become the 5th host of The Tonight Show. But the network didn't actually tell Jay Leno about this arrangement, not until 2004 at least. When they informed him that O'Brien would take over as host in 5 years, it seems like Leno didn't take very kindly to it. So in 2009, NBC tried to keep both of its late night stars. They offered Jay Leno a nightly prime time show before the local news and before O'Brien's Tonight Show. But the Tonight Show with Conan O'Brien and the Jay Leno show didn't immediately receive strong ratings, and NBC affiliates complained of declining viewership. So a decision was made by the NBC bigwigs. They would return Leno to his 11:35 p.m. start time, and they would bump back O'Brien a half hour later to 5 minutes past midnight. O'Brien and his staff were infuriated, and he refused to agree to the changes, and the situation grew heated. There was no legal breach of either host's contract, but the change really resulted in a huge public outcry, and there were a lot of demonstrations, mainly in support of O'Brien. Conan O'Brien released a public statement saying that he would not participate in the destruction of The Tonight Show, and it led to negotiations with NBC for a settlement. O'Brien and most of his staff finally received a payout, huge payout, and they walked away from the network, with his final Tonight Show airing January 22nd, 2010. Jay Leno was reinstated as host that March, and then O'Brien moved on to host a show called Conan. Leno would host The Tonight Show for a further 4 years until his retirement in 2014. But the controversy surrounding all the scheduling and the reinstatement of Leno was described by media outlets as embarrassing and a public relations disaster for NBC. When NBC did finally announce that Leno would leave The Tonight Show in spring of 2014, Jimmy Fallon was designated his successor. I don't want to tell you what I think of that guy. Leno's final show as the host of Tonight Show was on February the 6th, 2014. He had guests including Billy Crystal, who was the first guest that Leno ever had on his show, Jack Black, Kim Kardashian, Jim Parsons, Cheryl Cole, Chris Paul, Carol Burnett, and Oprah Winfrey. But in many ways, the damage was done for Leno. He faced a lot of criticism, mainly because a lot of people perceived his role in the 2010 Tonight Show conflict as crucial. Many people have said that in a 2004 Tonight Show clip, Leno said he would allow O'Brien to take over without incident. At the time, Leno said he didn't want O'Brien to leave NBC for a competing network. He says there's only one person who could do this into his 60s, and that was Johnny Carson. I think it's fair to say I'm no Johnny Carson. Basically saying, you hold it and hand it off to the next person. I don't want to see all the fighting. At the end of his segment, he said, Conon, it's yours. See you in 5 years, buddy. So some of the people who didn't like what Leno did, Rosie O'Donnell, she called Leno a bully, classless, and said his actions were kind of career-defining. In 2009, Leno also received criticism for asking rapper Kanye West how his recently deceased mother would have felt about the incident at the 2009 VMAs. Howard Stern had also been a critic of Leno before and following his Tonight Show time slot change announcement. Stern actually appeared on Late Night with Conan O'Brien in 2006 and said he felt it was unlikely that Leno would ever willingly give up the Tonight Show. During the conflict, Stern made loads of negative remarks about Leno as a guest on Late Show with David Letterman. Jimmy Kimmel also discussed his appearance on Leno's show during an interview with Mark Maron for the latter's podcast in 2012. Kimmel said that he felt O'Brien wasn't given a proper chance, but that he was also motivated by his own history with Leno. And according to Kimmel, Leno had some years prior been in serious discussions with ABC, another network, about the possibility of jumping ship. And during this period, Leno initiated a friendship with Kimmel. He wanted to ensure that they would be on good terms if the move was made. And under that scenario, Leno would have taken Kimmel's time slot and become his lead-in. However, after Leno made the arrangement to remain at NBC, those conversations were gone, according to Kimmel. And realising that Leno's relationship with him had been artificial, Kimmel felt worked over, to use his words. And he reasoned that Leno was using the ABC discussions as a bargaining chip to get his old job back. John Oliver has also criticised Leno for things beyond the Conan O'Brien debacle. But he's been criticised for many things. Patton Oswalt has also criticised Jay Leno's style. And he says comedians who don't like Jay Leno now, and I'm one of them, we're not like Jay Leno sucks. It's that we're so hurt and disappointed that one of the best comedians of our generation willfully has shut the switch off. Leno does have some reporters though. A few NBC sports presenters. Jerry Seinfeld. That doesn't say much. And others. But the bottom line is, the O'Brien and Leno story is far more dramatic than anything he could have put on screen.
Listen to this. Happy birthday to Jay Leno, 61 years old today. Happy birthday, Jay. Jay, of course, one of the few tyrants still alive. And all of his friends got together and had a party. They had a cake, and Jay, this is an interesting point, Jay cut the cake with the same knife he stuck in Conan's back.
And after all that drama, it's hard to add anything particularly spicy to this backstory on Jay Leno. After leaving the show, he continued touring as a stand-up comedian, and he would pop up here and there on game shows and in guest appearances in various TV offerings. He claims to have not spent a penny from the money he earned hosting The Tonight Show, and instead lives off the money from his stand-up routines. It also wouldn't be fair to close things without speaking to his charitable work. He and his wife are proud fundraisers and spokespeople for the Feminist Majority Foundation's campaign to stop gender apartheid in Afghanistan. He's also auctioned off his cars, of which he is an aficionado, in order to raise funds for charity. Look, let me say right now, I don't care how good Collision Course may end up being, it's not going to be anywhere near as dramatic as the Tonight Show conflict was. That shit was absolutely fascinating to me. I'm British, so we don't really get those shows over here at all, certainly not on telly, and when I've seen it, it's clips on YouTube. We have Graham Norton, who monopolises the talk show game over here in the UK. There's a few pretenders. We have Jonathan Ross. We had Alan Carr. I like Alan Carr, and I like Jonathan Ross in their own ways, but they're no Graham Norton. But it really is one king to rule them all over here. So Leno may or may not be an asshole in this Tonight Show conflict. I simply cannot comment. I do know that I like Conan O'Brien. I think he's very funny, very sharp. I do also know that I can't stand Jimmy Fallon. He and James Corden are just about the worst hosts of anything. So if Leno thought Fallon was the worthy successor, I don't know what that really says about the man's judgment. All told, this was a fascinating insight, but it really tells me nothing about what I can expect from Collision Course. All I know is it was a bad enough experience for Leno that he never chose to act in a starring role again. Is that a good thing or a bad thing for the world? Let's find out.
What do you get when a Japanese special agent comes to Detroit?
I talk some Jap. Toyota, Mitsubishi, Kawasaki, Teriyaki.
To team up with a wisecracking city cop.
Yeah, I don't think we need quite as much firepower, fellas. Let the people through, will you?
Hot on the trail of murder and corruption.
You see, Oshima stole revolutionary new turbocharger.
You got proof of this? You just make it up as you go along.
No. I see guilty look in Jared's eye.
Guilty looking eye. Well, with that kind of hard evidence, we should get a conviction overnight.
Collision Course.
Police officer! Criminal!
The funniest. Wackiest.
Just my luck, I get the only guy from Japan doesn't know karate.
Buddy cop comedy. To crash onto the screen.
Collision Course, released 1989, directed by Louis Teague and starring Pat Morita, Jay Leno, Chris Sarandon, Ernie Hudson, and Tom Noonan. Let me say immediately, the final shot of this film is the best thing in it, and it makes me want to give it all the flowers and all the stars I possibly could. The absolute balls on these guys to make that ending. I'll come back to it, but I have to tell you right now how good it is. So this is a pretty dated story about cultures clashing in Detroit. We have Jay Leno playing a cop called Costas, an undercover cop. Slick, wise ass, no nonsense, man's man, asks every woman he encounters for her number. On the other side of the coin, we have Pat Morita's Natsuo, a cop from Tokyo who is sent to Detroit to track down an engineer from a motoring plant, an automobile manufacturing plant, an engineer called Ashima who's absconded with a car part to the US. And we don't know the significance of this car part, but we do see very early on that the fact that he's brought it to America means that some very, very dangerous men are interested. And we get Leno and Morita going head to head throughout this film. First they butt heads and then they're forced to team up. It's not a great movie at all. It's straight to TV stuff, naturally. There is a lot of casual racism. A lot of casual racism. If you're sensitive to that kind of thing, you're probably not going to enjoy the movie, but it also feels like a time capsule. 1989. Here are some of the jokes. They're not even, well, they're insulting, but they're not clever. They're just like absolutely scraping the bottom of the barrel with these sorts of jokes. Here's some examples. Pat Morita is forced to really emphasize the accent. He has to say rips instead of lips. When Pat Morita's talking to someone in Tokyo on the phone, Jay Leno's translating, saying, Godzilla's attacking the city. For the love of God, stay at home. When Pat Morita walks into a room, people say things like, somebody order sushi. It's that level of crap. The jokes are weirdly crap throughout the movie. Pat Morita, funnily enough, though, is the funny one. It ain't Leno with all of his stand-up background. Morita is very, very funny. And I'm wrestling with it because half of it is the whole persona, the really turned up to 11, all the way maxed out persona of a Tokyo detective, and they've really overcooked the accent and whatnot. But it's just that he's very funny compared to Jay Leno's character. Jay Leno doesn't like having to work with Morita. He doesn't like that he's come into his country, and Morita exploits that for laughs. And a lot of the time the laughs don't work, but when they do, it's because of what Morita's doing. It's not because of what Leno's doing. Essentially, the film is playing on very real fears at the time, particularly in Detroit, where the economy is largely built around car manufacturing. And Japan, whose trade policies and export of cars were sort of blamed for Detroit job losses in the 1980s. So it's an interesting sort of social snapshot, just peppered with fucking casual Japanese racism throughout. Anyway, the culture clash thematic for the film is what provides the source of the narrative and the source of the humour for the characters. It's cool seeing some of these interesting names pop up. Chris Sarandon and Tom Noonan naturally playing bad guys. Ernie Hudson, which I was delighted by. I love Ghostbusters, so seeing Winston pop up in this was great. He plays Leno's partner. Criminally short screen time. He's there for the first quarter of the film, but then when Leno teams up with Morita, it's like, get out of the way, Hudson, we don't need you anymore. A shame. Nice but crap 80s soundtrack. You know, that high-end synthy piano. We even get some stereotypically oriental vibes on the high end of the piano as well. That's just what you're going to get in this sort of film. This is also the sort of film where people get rocket guns fired at them. I don't even know if these guns exist, but the guns that we see in this film are like RPGs, and we see them early on in the film, and that ain't even the half of the violence and the over-the-top nonsense that we get. So the interesting bit of the film is more when the two start to work together. The first half hour, the two are not working together. They're not even interacting with one another. Then we get about 15, 20 minutes where Leno's character is he's sort of staking out Morita's character. He's trying to work out what he's about. And then the second half of the film is the two working together. And this is where it works for me, because this is where I realise I have fallen in step with these two unlikely partners. It's 45 minutes on the nose. They've been taking pot shots at each other now, and they get drunk together. They get drunk together at Jay Leno's home. And this is a very funny scene because Natsuo can handle the whiskey almost better than Costas can, better than Jay Leno's character. He's banging it down. He's saying banzai to cheers. It's a little overcooked, but there's also a nice vibe to it. And they both get very drunk, and we see this sort of vulnerability and tenderness to them both with each other. And I like it. It's a shame that it has to get counteracted by all of these racial comments and jokes after that, and just some general crap humour. But that's the way this film is. It's a straight-to-TV film. We get a few fist fights along the way, which are kind of interesting. In fact, there's a particularly interesting fist fight at a bowling alley, which is probably the most entertaining the film has been up to that point. We get visual gags, sound gags. We're leaning into cultural tensions and using a little finesse here. But I have to say, it's a bad sign when you get an hour into a 90 minutes movie, as I did, and you're ready for them to wrap it up. It's only 90 minutes. It should be tight. It should be zippy. I was ready for it to be wrapped up. And in that final half hour, they really ramp up all of Pat Morita's Japanese shouting and rantings, and it starts to lose something. It becomes so messy. And the reality is, I know this is a cheap action comedy, but it came out at the same time as this incredible film, a Ridley Scott film which I love called Black Rain, which stars Michael Douglas, Andy Garcia, and I'm afraid I don't know the Japanese actor's name, but it's the same concept but treated seriously, where it's the other way round. It's Michael Douglas and Andy Garcia actually have to travel out to Tokyo and work with a Japanese detective on a case. And funnily enough, I realised that a lot of the beats in this movie are almost identical to Black Rain, right up to the absolutely insane ending. For anyone who has seen Black Rain, you will know that there is a very 80s schmaltzy, superb freeze frame of an ending. Not even freeze frame, I don't think. It feels like a freeze frame moment. The score kicks in, it's beautiful. This film has that. It has its own Black Rain moment, a split screen, freeze frame ending with 80s soundtrack. Fuck me, it's unreal. It's brilliant. When I saw it, I gave the film so much goodwill that it had lost in that final half hour. It's a very curious little artifact of a film. I'm glad to have seen it. It's a peculiar obscurity. It's a bizarre little work of fiction. It also, that final shot in the film isn't even the maddest thing. Towards the end, Pat Morita's character, I don't want to spoil it. There is a car speeding towards him, rushing at him head on, and Pat Morita runs at the car. And what happens next has to be seen to be believed. There are friends of the podcast who I've spoken to about this and who I've listened to do full episodes on, and they were equally blown away by this particular scene.
You know something? I think you make a better crook than you do a cop.
You have big sense of humor.
Oh, yeah.
So we must do banzai.
Banzai?
Yeah. Nice Japanese banzai. Banzai!
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 Banzai! Yes!
So I think it's very interesting that they went with Jay Leno as the cool guy in this film. He's got the slick back hair. the cool attitude. He's rocking his drop-top convertible when we meet him. He's racing a couple of black guys who are sort of taunting him, saying that he won't be able to get their radio station on his car. He's picking up police women. He's picking up bar women. And partnering up with Ernie Hudson, I guess, early on, is meant to frame him as this everyman. Like, he's able to relate to everyone. He has some street credit. He's got the open shirt look. He sits with his legs spread wide open in his blue denims and his beehive hair. I just don't buy his call. He's Jay Leno. I have to say his speech affectation is particularly noticeable here as well. So I wonder if he was trained out of that as he did more and more work on stage. And I think his wisecracking was genuinely meant to be funny for audiences, but to me, the delivery just felt very flat and very dull. As I say, Morita outclassed him. He really delivered all of his lines, Leno I mean, with little conviction, little charisma, all the charisma of a slice of brown bread, as far as I'm concerned. And he's a little bit slimy too. Just all of these women that he's constantly asking for their home phone numbers. It's like, this isn't interesting, this isn't cool. Maybe 80s audiences thought it was. Like I say, some gags do work, but only when he's opposite Morita. Although Morita's played for big laughs, Leno does have the occasional good comeback, but they're few and far between. Morita is a million times the funny man Leno is. He has the acting chops and the comedic chops, and Leno's just floundering a little opposite him. I'm sorry to say it. In fact, there's even a moment towards the end of the film where he fluffs a line. He goes to a police crime scene, and at the tape, he fluffs the line. Go and listen to it. You'll see it. But there you go. That was Collision Course, and it's bizarre, and I'm very glad that I saw it. Just to add a few bits of trivia here, which are quite interesting. When Steve Martin appeared on The Tonight Show with Jay Leno in 2005, he played a game called Name That Clip, where he shows 2 clips to Jay Leno from Steve Martin films. And the films were Shop Girl and Cheaper by the Dozen 2. And Martin would get $20 from Jay Leno if he got one of the films wrong. And the last clip he played was from this movie. And Leno immediately said it was a horrible movie. And Martin said Leno was right, but that he would still lose $20 for making it. And in 1989, keeping the Tonight Show connection going, Pat Morita guested on Jay Leno's The Tonight Show. And while they were talking about the making of this movie, they admitted that the movie just ran out of money by the last day of filming. And some key scenes were waiting to be shot, and they had no budget for editing and no budget for post-production. And I'm glad, because if that means we got the ending we got, fantastic. Finally, another Tonight Show connection. Jay Leno publicly admitted on the show that he detested the movie and that he was embarrassed that he'd agreed to be in it.
I got to bring it up, and I hope it doesn't embarrass you, was a movie called Collision Course with Pat Morita.
Oh, that's so bad, isn't it?
But it was great. It's so bad it was great. And for me, it just harkens of that time of movie making.
It's horrible. Terrible.
But what was that experience like? Were you going to be an actor? Did you want to, or was that just a job?
Here's what acting is like for comedians. Okay, that is very funny. That was hilarious. Let's do it again exactly the same way. Good. Okay, that was just as funny. We're going to do it one more time from this angle. Good. That was as hilarious as the first 2 times. Oh, really?
It's not enough.
You get no sense. Then you wait a year to see if it's funny or not. I like the immediacy of doing stand-up,
I just really feel the need to make a connection.
Well, Niles, I think you've made a connection. It just seems a little bit extreme, though,
So here we are then, the point in the show where we split screen, freeze frame, smile, and try to link everything back to the episode of Frasier we just watched, specifically where we try to link Jay Leno's Don, the man who just can't lose weight no matter how many burgers he eats, to Jay Leno's supposedly cool, calm, and collected Costas in Collision Course. So I think the connective tissue here is that both of these guys don't realise they are their own worst enemy. They're looking for answers and villains outside of themselves to blame for their current state of affairs. Don visits the drive-thru. He's complaining about weight loss, but he's at the drive-thru. And Costas sees the downturn in the success of the motor industry in Detroit being the fault of the Japanese rather than the various economic and political issues taking place at home under that banner of the good old US of A. And they're both appalling at conveying a punchline too, incidentally, so they have that in common. And what do they both have in common? Jay Leno. So Jay Leno, maybe you ain't the stand-up comedian that everyone thinks you are. So look to yourself for answers, Jay, before you blame it on outside forces, is what we say over here as we make our Crane connection. And so, with a tear, we say goodbye yet again to the many friends we've made along the way in today's episode. Goodbye to homeless Bulldog, Goodbye to gluttonous Don. Goodbye to the duplicitous behaviour of Jay Leno's talk show host antics. And goodbye to his one and only leading role. At least that freeze frame will stay with me, and I suspect all who watch it, for eternity. As always, thank you, dear listeners. If you're liking, if you're subscribing and sharing and all that good stuff, thank you. You can stay up to date with what I've got coming up by subscribing to the podcast. Just search for Frasier on Film on all the usual podcast platforms, and then you won't miss a single episode. You can also connect with me on all the socials, Instagram, Threads, Blue Sky, Facebook. I'm all over the place. Just search for Frasier on Film, and you can get in touch via email using frasieronfilm@gmail.com. If you would like to leave a review, please do. I would appreciate it, but I'm not going to beg it. Next week's episode, Frasier is going to be grappling with his own mortality when a doctor his own age suddenly drops dead in death becomes him. This episode will also feature our first ever on-camera guest, Maddie Corman, and we'll be plumbing the depths of 80s cinema once again as we lock in on 7 Minutes in Heaven. Jay Leno has left the building.